All right, it's 2:33, and let's hope that I don't read through all the prepared notes that I have because that means I'll be talking a lot, and I don't want to talk that much. Okay, so we'll get started with Matt in the preamble.
Sure. First of all, I want to say apologies that my microphone is not great at the moment. So hopefully you can all hear me. Just want to run through the guidelines for today's advisory council meeting. So all participants will join this meeting with muted microphones. If you could please rename yourself to include both your first name, your last name, and your affiliation, should you have one, that would be great. To participate in the discussion, please select the raise hand function. Depending on the version of Zoom you have, this may be found just at the toolbar at the bottom. It might be under the reactions section or the reactions button. Sorry, I'm just admitting a couple stragglers here. And it also may be in the chat window if you click those three dots, depending on the version of Zoom you have. If you are calling into this meeting, you can use *9 to raise your hand and *6 to mute and unmute yourself. And if you have any technical difficulties, please feel free to contact me via the chat box at marcher@ctps.org or at 857-702-3708. And Len, I will toss it back to you.
Yeah, thank you, Matt. And we got a lot to cover today. I mean, it's not a long agenda, but I think the items might take a little while. So we'll skip the intros if we do end up having some free time. Then we can just go around the table while maybe people get some ideas of what they want for upcoming meetings. I mean, so with that, we're going to go to the discussion of the fiscal year 2022 UPWP, and we weren't able to get our letter in, but we did do a letter. The subcommittee did its job and created a letter, and so we want. And the reason we didn't was that we weren't able to have RTAC meeting before the deadline, and I didn't think it was appropriate for the subcommittee to submit that letter without getting the full approval of the or the approval of the full committee. And so, as we know, the staff gives us all the attention we want, and so they will take our comments into consideration. But I think it's good for us to have the discussion on record about how we feel about the letter, and as a consequence, how we feel about the UPWP, because you may not agree with some components of the letter, and it's important that people know that. So, is Andy here?
Just got here.
Oh, excellent. Hi, Andy. And so, as the author of the letter, do you want to give people a little intro to it?
Sure. Let me
Great.
get my notes up too so I don't
Sure.
forget.
Sure, no problem.
But I did also want to note that I just had a meeting scheduled right now for about half an hour from now. So we'll not be able to stay on for very long today. So I'm coming on just at the right moment, apparently.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, so we had a pretty robust conversation taking a look at the UPWP and what are the discrete studies that are planned for the next year. I think one thing that wanted to caveat was to say that this year's budget for studies is less than previous years. And so we did have a little bit of a conversation of basically centered on the question of, right, do we feel like these studies are the right studies, just given kind of the long-term goals for the region and stuff like that. And I think there was in particular one study that we felt like needed to at least be looked at again, which was the specific study about equity and access in the Blue Hills. I think there's a lot of great things in there, but I think the main comment that we kind of came to was that the study seemed a little bit too limited in the scope for a regional kind of organization to be pursuing. So that's kind of one of the main conversations that we had there about specific studies. I think there was a general kind of comment that was more so on just making sure that we're providing the right kind of support for municipalities or organizations that work on transportation issues as it relates to recovering from the effects of COVID-19 and what that has meant in terms of an economic recovery. I think there is a small item that is included, and even just a little bit of increase perhaps would allow for just one more municipality to participate in that program, in that study. And it seemed like that could be one place where we could take a look at maybe we could assess how much is devoted to the different studies. I think there were some ideas that were also dropped that we think that should return if they're not funded for the year, this year, but in the next UPWP, which are listed in the bullets there. This is the Vision Zero Phase 2 and the Resilience Program. In particular, I think traffic safety and the question of how transportation and mobility infrastructure is built more resiliently to the effects of climate change are things that will definitely not go away. Really, traffic safety and kind of climate change are things that the current transportation system just is not capable of responding to very well. And so, if these ideas are not passing from this year into the UPWP of funded ideas, we think that essentially these ideas should come back when they go to the universe of projects and make sure to continue their focus on those things. So that's a very quick rundown of kind of the conversation that we had, and what really ended up making it into the letter that is drafted and what you see on screen here.
Thanks, Andy. Yeah, I thought it was a good meeting, and I liked the letter that came out of it, and it was such that I felt that I couldn't create my own version that would be as good. So I didn't try, but apparently John McQueen didn't have a problem with that at all, and he crafted a very good letter. And I would say in addition to this, and maybe as a segue into your comments about this letter in UPWP, John, would you like to tell us about your letter, or even read it if you want?
Actually, no, I think Andy covered things very nicely in his note and placed points of emphasis where, I guess, to some degree where I had. I guess the only thing I suppose I would reiterate from conversations and in my note is just the inclusion or re-inclusion, I guess, of congestion pricing.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, John. I see Laura has her hand up.
Thanks, Glenn. I'm a little unclear on what the process, where we are in the process. Has this letter gone in already?
No, it has not.
Oh, okay.
And go ahead, sure.
There's a project that I really want to advocate for, and it's not COVID related, but it is such a hot topic, and that is the trip generation follow-up. It has to do with generating parking standards or just knowledge about parking, particularly for biotech lab type projects. I know that it has nothing to do with COVID at all, but I know I've made this speech before. There are literally 10 projects in Watertown coming down the pike, and every single one we are fighting with them about the parking. They want more and more and more parking, and I have no data to refute that. And it's to me, it's one of my biggest problems right now, and one of the things that's standing in the way of really changing how people commute. So if it's at all possible to keep that in the ideas worth continuing column, I really want to advocate for that as strongly as I possibly can.
Okay, all right. I would say, so just to make clear, we missed the deadline for the letter, and the fiscal year 2022 PPWP has been approved. So we can edit this letter for the record, but essentially this conversation is a record about how we feel. And I think what we should take from this is from the comments that we make now, how we are going to approach next year's and UPWP. And I'm going to advocate that we start thinking about that sooner rather than later. So
I know Sandy's on the agenda. Is Sandy coming to this meeting?
No,
I don't see him.
Sandy is actually out today.
Rosh Hashanah.
It is Rosh Hashanah, and
Right.
as I'm Jewish, so I probably should have foreseen this. I'm not a great Jew. But what I will say is that this letter, it will inform both the advisory council on how it wants to, approach federal fiscal year 2023, but it will also inform Sandy in his ongoing work as well. He very much has his ear tuned to the advisory council.
So what was the outcome in the final UPWP of this project, for this project? Is it still in?
It is, yes.
And was it cut or anything? I mean, trying to get a sense of whether it's going to happen this year or not.
Right. So I'm just double checking right now. There may have been some minor content changes to the project description, but basically the draft 2022 UPWP is almost identical to the final approved version, aside from minor content changes.
Okay, so you can't find it.
It looks like it's
See it.
in the.
No. I'm sorry. To be very clear, I'm saying that it is included. Sorry, I was
Okay.
dancing around that.
Okay, it wasn't cut. It was
No.
in any way. It was as is, as far as you know.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Good news.
And so I see John's hand up first in sequence, but I don't know if it's still up. And then I see Franny's.
Yes, it is.
Okay.
I would just second Laura's recommendation on the trip generation and advocacy for it, because that not only in Watertown, but farther down the road on Soldiers Field Road and in Western Ave in Alston, it's a huge issue too, with various over parking allocations for various initiatives, the ERC included, Nexus, et cetera. Okay.
I certainly didn't mean to imply that it was just Watertown. It is the whole region is having a boom, and it's a developer's MO is to push for more parking. And if you can't refute them, the brokers are telling them they need more parking, and it's just very, very frustrating to not have any data.
Right. And especially, I guess, to ward off that, there should be more of an effort to get West Station done, up and running, and TNCs or whatever, shuttling people and having that access to at least that corridor.
Thanks for that, John. And Franny, Ms. Osmond?
Yeah, so formal. So I was going to ask Laura to clarify who the they were, and I gather it asking from, when you're talking about asking for more parking, it's the designers, the developers. I assume,
The developers and the brokers are pushing the developers, so it's a little teamwork there between the brokers and the developers.
Yep, and
It's-
I would advise us to, since this letter's just going to sort of hopefully be read and just carried through while the process happens for the next year, why not put in Laura's comments about parking and extend it to the whole area so that it gets carried over into suggestions for next year. It seems like I would think that we should just add something about parking studies to the letter. And I wanted to tell Matthew Archer, coming from another Jew who doesn't really think about the second day of Rosh Hashanah, I wouldn't call you a bad Jew for that.
I do appreciate that, Franny. Thank you. We can have a theological discussion perhaps another time.
Thanks for understanding, everybody. And so I have next in the queue, Mr. Stewart, John.
Afternoon, everybody. I like the letter. I like Laura's suggested addition to it. Anybody need a motion? And I would say, in my experience, that it's bankers who are really driving the cart here, and developers don't want to upset their bankers.
Right.
But if you can reduce the amount of parking, you could actually build more building square footage, which is what gets sold or leased. The parking pad doesn't actually bring in too much revenue, but additional floors and square footage that a lower parking ratio permits, greatly enhances the viability of the project. So developers would generally be in favor of that. And it's an opportunity for things like TMAs and regional transportation solutions to work against. But I'm completely in favor of adding this to the letter, which is good on its own.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.
And so I have John McQueen back in the queue.
Yeah, I in a second John's sentiments on that, but also, I guess more formally within that trip generation, to have a subset of that being to find and recommend alternative sources of transportation to connect the constituents, let's say, or the users at the lab sites. So that there's something a little more tangible that developers can maybe look at in terms of ways to get their people in and out versus cars.
And just to make it clear, John, and anyone else, when I say back in the queue, I'm not complaining. I'm just making sure that you are indeed back in the queue and that your hand isn't still up from the previous time. And so Matthew Peterson.
Yeah, so I was just looking at the UPWP as I believe, is it Matt Archer put it into the chat, the link to the document as it was theoretically approved. It does seem like the language for this specific study, it got approved for $20,000 to do a kind of a literature review and kind of study on trip generation around parking, possibly to be submitted to the ITE for inclusion in an updated kind of parking generation manual. And so I think that would result in a pretty good document to be used for this kind of purpose. Is this something where like the current study as proposed is not sufficient, or is this I'm just making sure that the discussion is like clear that there is a study that is going to be done on this exact topic, and I wasn't sure if that was clear.
Well,
I
maybe,
had heard that it was reduced in size from someone, but now you're saying that that's not true, so I'm less concerned about it.
yeah, I'm not sure if it was reduced in size, so yeah, I'll have to go back and look.
All right, we got the comment letter. Yeah, I'm gonna look now if I can
Sure.
get there.
Sure, and I have to go back to. I know I could do it if I wasn't running the meeting, but
Matt, could you put in the chat the link to the final document, the UPWP document? You could probably find it faster than me, I'm thinking.
Sure.
Sorry, just
sure.
quickly
So-
looking at it, it looks like the proposed the FY 2021 budget for trip generation rate research, which is I believe what this was building on, was 45,000, and then the new project focusing on parking was for 20,000.
Was
Yeah.
how much? Say the
20
amount again?
20,000.
20,000, and that's what was voted on, 20,000. Okay,
I thought maybe you meant reduce versus the what came out of the universe, because there was a number associated with the projects when they were in the universe that when they then made it into the draft had a different dollar amount associated with them, mainly because the amount of money that the MPO
shifted
had
around.
was reduced and then shifted. So that's what I thought you were getting at, Laura, and that's what I meant. It'd be a little challenging for me to try and figure that out while running the meeting. But I guess the question is, well, first, I do agree that we should add to the letter, I mean, the emphasis on this. And if you don't think that is a sufficient amount, then we can add that language into. I'm going to stop talking, let Andy
You know,
talk. Hold on, and let you finish. And then Andy, go ahead.
it does seem like now that I'm rereading the letter that the things that you put under this category of worth continuing were things that were not funded. So maybe it doesn't belong there and maybe I jumped prematurely to the gun, jumped the gun.
Well, it still
Andy?
launched it. It launched a worthwhile discussion, So Andy?
Yeah, just I think one other thing that's kind of come into play in the last couple of months, at least in Cambridge, is that our traffic, parking, and transportation department is doing a study to reevaluate the criteria that we use to study development proposals. And so our planning board has essentially a report that is prepared, and we have specific criteria that are included in that. And we're kind of weighing out, right, like there's the standard way of doing things with trip generation. Do we agree with that standard way? Is there alternate ways that we should be saying that the planning board should be considering trip generation among other transportation related effects? And so we may have some more stuff to share in the next year or two, just kind of in line with this next federal fiscal year study that's going to be going on, and maybe potentially in the year after as well. So I think Cambridge is also struggling with that too, right? Like we do get proposals for lab spaces in Alewife outside of the Kendall Square area that do not look at all like what's in Kendall Square. And we kind of have like this thing of how, it's only a couple miles away. How could it be so different? And we don't have a lot of good, technical understanding of how to respond to those proposals in that way. So we're kind of struggling still too with the same question that Laura's bringing up, and we may have some stuff that may be worth sharing in the next year or two is kind of what I'm gonna maybe leave the capstone on as.
All right, thank you. And so, I mean, maybe I will save us. Well, hold on. There's Jen.
Yes, hi. I just wanted to share, I did check, and it looks like the draft UPWP that was released earlier this year had the same funding total, 20,000. So it hasn't been reduced over the course of this development cycle.
Thank you.
All right, thanks. Thanks a lot. Appreciate that. So I think I'm going to try and save us a vote and ask if anyone has objections to us adding, additional language regarding trip generation. Now's the time. Tell us.
I mean, I guess if it is already included, if they've already put in what we would be requesting, I'm not sure that we necessarily need to highlight that, but.
Right.
So
I'm wondering that it doesn't seem to fit anymore under worth continuing. I'm not sure. There may be another place. I'm sure I should have looked at this letter before, but I don't remember getting it. I'm sorry.
No problem. I don't mean, I think, yeah, I don't think he did. I mean, so
Okay.
yeah, I didn't see it attached to the agenda, and I don't know if it was sent around in August when Andy initially sent it to Matt and myself. So it's not your fault if you didn't see it before now.
Okay.
So, yeah.
So if it calls out, this is a study that we don't think is necessary or appropriate right now, and these two studies were cut, but we would like to see them either continued now or in the future, then it doesn't actually fit into either of those two categories. So I don't know if you did fit it in, it would have to be sort of a different category. So I'm okay if it doesn't go in now that I've looked at this more carefully.
Okay. Mr. Reeker, as the author, you fine with that?
Does that make sense to you, Andy?
I think yes. I mean, we could always consider adding just another section of, things that we want to put a fine point on to say, we really like this.
Support these, yeah.
Like we didn't go to that level in our conversation with the committee, the subcommittee, but we're generally happy. We're just kind of concerned about the two ideas that did get cut and making sure that they have a place next year. But we could, underline, we really like this. We really want to make sure we put our support in there. And I'm happy to write maybe another section underneath the overall comment to say something like that.
John?
I agree with Andy, but an area that you might put it in is in the recommended modifications, and maybe request that its budget gets upped so as to really cover some of the alternative methods of to and from transportation for some of those lab sites and such.
Well, I think the problem with upping it though is that then where's the money come from?
How much is left from Blue Hills?
Well, okay. So just keep in mind that this is all post facto, so I guess we could say anything.
Right.
Be in the spirit of this letter going out in a timely basis. Unless we were going to, let me back up and say, I think we're just better off putting a fine point on it and then advocating for more in the next cycle.
Can I have one other comment? If I don't want to belabor this discussion
Sure.
if we're over time, but so John McQueen in his letter talked about some very car oriented studies, but he didn't name them, if I remember correctly. And I wondered what those were. And I know it's too late, but I'm just
That's fine.
curious what he thought.
John, you're on. John McQueen.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
Laura, which section are you referring to?
Didn't you just send a letter today?
I did. No, I didn't send it to, well, I sent it to you, but I sent it back in August to Sandy Johnston.
Okay. And in the letter, you said that there were some projects that were very auto focused. You thought that could be eliminated, but you didn't name them.
Well, there were two, if I'm not mistaken. Hold on. It was M1, which is 1342, addressing safety, mobility, access, and M2, addressing priority corridors. And if you wanted to add in M3, safely operated, whatever, that whole clump right there is car oriented anyway, okay? And that takes up 60% of the budget alone.
Right.
Okay, and that's what I was referring to, I guess. It was just that overemphasis, I guess, or over budgeting, I think, for the car oriented stuff, and mainly giving lip service to active transportation or other alternatives.
Yeah, the studies. Yeah, I know what you mean. Okay, I got you. And so, well, I guess the question now is whether we do that fine point or not. And I think there isn't necessarily disagreement to that, meaning that no one disagrees with the nature of the fine point. And I think the question only is whether we have it or not. And I would leave that to the author. And I think we can ask the group meeting for a vote of approval of the letter with the possibility of that edit, which we then just send to the staff. So I can't make that motion, but that's my suggested motion if anyone wants to make it.
So I guess I could move that that we vote to approve the letter as written.
Okay. And
I'll second it.
so Matthew, have you become
That's
a member
right.
yet?
I'm not a member. I'm not a
Okay,
member of this
yeah.
of this body. Never mind.
Yeah, hopefully we'll be. So
Nice try though.
yeah, we welcome you.
I just really like a moving meeting. That's all.
Get it.
Yeah, right.
So we're waiting for a second.
I will do the second then.
All right, thank you, Andy. Yeah, you can do it, even though you're the author. And so, it's been a long time since we've done one of these votes in the middle of a meeting, Matt. So it's going to be your call whether we do roll or not.
I think it may be best if we do roll.
Fine.
Personally, I'd call for opposition. Go from there.
Well, I mean, well, I gotta tell you, in all the board meetings I've done, it's usually been a second, and the chair hasn't really called for opposition. And we had a discussion. We didn't really hear any opposition, and so you get to vote against it, and if you don't want it, so I think you get to voice your opposition. I guess at this point, though, what I can do, since we have the motion in a second, I can open it up for some more discussion, and so if there is more discussion.
I was suggesting that you only ask for opposing votes.
Oh, I got you. I
I'm
got
sorry.
you. And I understand. Sorry about that. Well, I think the way when we handle it formally, we just kind of go through and have everyone vote. So I'm going to leave that up to Matt.
I apologize for slowing the meeting down, but I do think it's better for the sake of the record if we do a formal roll call vote.
Sure.
And that being said, John, I completely agree with you. It would be much smoother to just call for opposition. But I think just with regard to open meeting law, this is probably the better way to go. I apologize.
All right.
So
Well,
with
call and
that,
roll.
all right, Leonard Diggins,
Yes.
Scott Zadakis,
Yes.
thank you. John Seward,
Yes.
thank you. Laura Weiner,
Yes.
thank you. David Montgomery,
Yes.
thank you. Franny Osman,
Yes.
thank you. John McQueen,
Yes.
thank you. Andy Reeker,
Yes.
thank you. John Stewart, I already got you. I apologize. Sorry, my my participants list has gotten rearranged here. Fred Mosley.
Yep.
Thank you. Owen McDonald. I'm just trying to see. Owen may have some difficulties unmuting right now. All right. Skylar Larrabee.
Yes.
All right. With the exception of Owen McDonald, the motion passes. That being said, if there is someone who I have not called on, I'm sorry, my participant list got really mixed up here.
You got Franny?
I believe I did get Franny.
Okay. Sorry. Okay. Great.
I think we're all set.
So great. Thanks. So moving on to the next topic. It's going to be chapter 10 of needs assessment, and I sorry about to say hit the wrong button. So long, Andy. I thought it was a great way to end this journey through the needs assessment, and there are so many ideas there, and I think a lot for us to contemplate, especially when it comes to the next UPWP. And even though Andy has taken off, and we didn't have an official chair, of the committee because it's not required. Kind of like as the letter writer, I kind of almost think of him as the chair. But that said, I'm thinking that it might be good to pull that committee back together before the staff comes to us asking us for ideas, because I think we can make some more concrete contributions to the ideas in this next cycle. First, based on some of the conversation today, but also based on, I think, a lot of some of the ideas that were in that last chapter. So before I say more, I'll ask anyone else if they want to say anything about that chapter. for a while. All right, well, John.
Hi. Couple of things. On 10 in the was it table 10.1 in the other, I think it's the equity programs should get check marks, a little bit more preference or impact, and have check marks on safety and economic vitality, as well as just being equity.
Okay.
Okay, and then on 10.2, 10.2.1's own business, potential programs, I kind of sensed that there was a missing item, which might be the enhanced expansion of ped and bike facilities, although I think that's perhaps implicit in some things farther down, but it probably in that section could stand it. And in 10.5 at the end, I think that the measure of mode shift should also be added, and this would be, I guess, to Laura's point, add mode shift in areas of residential or commercial or industrial development, and to see what those new developments or planned developments seem to be targeting versus what the normal area or what the ambient area has as a mode shift.
All right. Those are some astute and sophisticated responses there, John. Thank you. And Matthew.
Yeah, I just had first I had a question about how are the kind of, I guess, these classifications or tags for each potential MPO actions or areas assigned? Were these assigned by MPO staff or by the 3C committee or not, I'm sorry, by the people writing this document, or was there some process to decide like, oh, this measure is related to capacity management and clean air, et cetera, et cetera?
So the categories are the categories that have been determined by the MPO in conjunction with the staff, as goal areas, for lack of a better phrase, and so it's not that staff just arbitrarily, and I know you didn't mean it that way, picks what it thinks is important in developing the LRTP, and then checks off the boxes. That's a process that has been determined, with the board, and so those categories then get applied, to all of the projects and studies. Did that answer your question?
I guess, yeah, I guess it's so what you're saying is that so kind of the MPO that is between the staff and the members of the MPO are the ones who decide which categories apply to each project line item in these tables. So the staff and the MPO are the ones deciding, let's say, for analyzing peak capacity of the MBT rapid transit system, that is a capacity management project.
Oh, I see.
And not a transportation. Like, I just kind of curious as to where those assignments come from.
Oh, I got you. So the assignments, I got you. So the assignments are done by the staff. I thought you were talking about the categories, that to which they are assigned. So the MPO board, which the staff determines the categories, but who checks them off? And I am pretty sure it's the staff. And so, would you disagree with that, Matt Archer?
No, I would not disagree with that.
And maybe as a former member of the staff, Jen, you want to chime in on that?
Yes, no, I think the staff would, I'm sure, made those determinations. I'm sure if MPO members had disagreed or something, there could have been a conversation about it. Like in some way, by endorsing this document, the MPO has kind of endorsed what its contents, but I'm fairly positive staff is the one doing this,
Right.
this work. Yeah.
So does that answer your question, Matt?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think
Okay.
the only reason I brought that up is because I think that I guess I think some of these items you could, I mean, I guess it depends on how narrowly these categories are being drawn, but for things like clean air and transportation equity, I think, I mean, this is, I come from transit matters. So I do think that like things that encourage transit use or drive mode shift or anything that looks at shifts to sustainable modes of transportation like bike ped transit does ultimately end up having an impact on clean air and transit equity, even if that isn't the primary focus of it. And so I don't know if that's maybe these are just narrowly drawn categories, but I think that some of these things, line items are maybe kind of not getting as much credit, I guess you could say, in terms of meeting the goal areas of the MPO as they could be, and are kind of being and maybe kind of very narrowly drawn. But then again, I could just be maybe misreading some of the categories or some of the project descriptions themselves. But that's just something was my impression upon reading this chapter.
Oh, well, that's a good comment, and I hear you, and so yeah, well, thank you for that, and something to keep in mind and to be conveyed to staff. So, John.
Yeah, hi. And I thank you very much for those comments, Matthew. I had another comment on the, was it 10.3, the existing studies?
Mhm.
And I think this is something that really affects the whole LRTP that we've discussed throughout the weeks, is that almost the first 8 need a really to include a really deep dive focus into the impacts on residual behavior pre and post COVID. I mean, COVID has just been such a had a dynamic impact on everything that it really, it's just going to have to almost be a standalone all encompassing study in and of itself, the effects and impacts of COVID and what are the projected future, you know, what's it going to continue with and what's going to go back to normal, whatever normal was.
Right. But at least we have a sense of what things were like, when we were putting together this LRTP, and we have a sense of what was working and what wasn't, or at least what we wanted to be different. And so to the extent we can influence how things return or to what things return, then we by going through this will be more informed and they can have a greater say, just by force of being more knowledgeable as to what we do. So that's that was the main reason for going through this exercise, COVID or not. That's not to dismiss your comments at all, John. I mean, I hear you. It's really in addition to your comments. And so um not seeing any hands raised. I mean, I'm gonna try and stay on track and just add a few more things in 4 minutes. I mean, one study that I saw as a good potential study that I would like to see us push for in the next cycle is the one about dispatching and supervision and bus reliability for the MBTA, and they it mentioned that there could be some impact on bus bunching or figuring uh, mitigating that, and so I'd like to see something like that done, and uh, I'll quickly mention some things in the appendices because I just didn't have it in me to push the appendices, but just in case you didn't take a look at those, I mean, maybe something that will encourage you to take a look. I'm not going to, we're pretty much done with the needs assessment. So that's that. But Appendix A, it had a lot of a listing of a lot of policies, initiatives, and legislative acts and the rules that come from them. Appendix B had a good listing of studies and reports. I mean, Appendix C had links to a lot of good data and their links. I mean, so not just reference to them. And in particular, I want to draw your attention to the needs assessment data browser. Appendix D, we had the MPO's outreach process on the LRTP, and there was a schedule there. I think it can give you a sense of what is coming. I mean, in fact, I'm thinking that in the next month or two, we should hear from the MPO that is getting ready to start the next cycle of public outreach for the next LRTP, and I'm kind of wondering what it's going to be called too. So, and Appendix C actually talks about the changes to the visions, goals, and objectives from the previous LRTP, which was charting progress to 2040, to this current one, which is destination 2040. I do know that the next one's going to have 2050 in it, but what word or words before that, before 2050 will be, I don't know yet. So that's that. I'm gonna let someone in, and I think I'll move on to the next item on the agenda, which is the transportation improvement, the TIP ad hoc committee. And so, Matt, if you can drop into chat the link from the last meeting, the PDF that Matt Genova presented to us, that would be good. I just want to highlight three things and then read a comment that I got from Sheila LePage, from Lexington, and then open it up to comments made. So essentially, the MPO the ad hoc committee is going to present to the board that it does the following three interventions in order to try to prevent significant cost overruns. And intervention one is that we require more advanced design status at project programming, meaning that projects that we will put on the tip will have to be at the 25% design stage and have an approved estimate of its cost, meaning by MassDOT, because we had seen what Matt Genova had presented to us, that most of the large increases had come between the PRC stage and the 25% design stage. And the PRC is the project review committee stage. Is that the right terminology, Matt Archer?
That is correct.
Thank you. And so by me saying that it has to be the 25% design state with an approved estimate, hopefully we will contain most of the unexpected costs. The second intervention is that we create additional touch points between the project proponents, MPO staff, the board, and MassDOT staff. And so the recommended amount of contact is going to be twice a year, meaning just so that everyone is keeping apprised of how the project is coming along and readiness, but also the cost of it. And the third intervention is establish a policy for rescoring projects when costs increase beyond the specified threshold. And that threshold is depending on the size of the project. So I think the smaller projects maybe have like a 25% increase, and the larger projects, and I forget the exact number associated with that, but maybe it's like 10% or something like that. But Matt hopefully dropped the document into the chat. And this has to be approved by the board, and then it'll go out for review or for input from the public. So it's a long way from being the new policy, and we'll have many opportunities to input on that starting now. And I'll quickly read Sheila's letter. She wanted to be here, but she wasn't able to make it. So she says that she fully supports the policy recommendation. She would like to see the policy implemented sooner rather than later, but the MPO should, as best they can, honor existing obligations on the tip. But if there are any scope creeps in estimates, overages, the proponents should come to a meeting and explain why, and the MPO should allow themselves the flexibility to start to enforce the policy. And she also thinks that a 2.5 million or 20% cost overage is too big with threshold, especially if we are accounting for inflation. She thinks we should consider 15% as the threshold. And that's about it. So So yeah, and she also agrees that having projects hit the 25% design milestone before you get on the tip will help immediately. So that's Sheila's input. So with that, I open it up to folks here. Comments, suggestions.
I guess I would just say, without raising my hand, sorry,
Sure, that's
it's a
fine.
very complicated, and sometimes the cost estimates are due to MassDOT wanting you to do something different or more than you originally had planned to do. Sometimes it's MBT, sometimes like in a Mount Auburn Street project that I'm working on, the MBTA is asking for additional things to be done that weren't done before. So it's not always that the town just didn't get a good estimate. It's super complicated, and things take so long and time, the market goes up and down for contractors and how, price, and with it prices,
Right.
it's very hard.
Right. And I think that's the reason for the additional touch points is that people get to explain that because these aren't going to be it it's a policy, but it's strong guidelines. I mean, and so with a good explanation for cost increases, then it won't kill the project. I mean, and hopefully these cost increases are coming along. I mean, in the like, let's say the next year is fiscal year, I mean, 23. Let me go out a little further, 24. I mean, then hopefully, when we get to 23, we will have understood why the costs are higher than when the project went in onto the tip, let's say in 21, fiscal year 21. Is that making sense to you, Laura?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, great. All right. And John?
So I've been following the subgroups meetings with quite a bit of interest, and I take Sandy's observations to heart. Fortunately, he's not here to defend himself. But it seems like a fair amount of the crux of this is the length of time that projects are in development. And as Laura says, conditions change, so the numbers have to change. But it's also that communities don't necessarily understand fully what's going to be called for, and they may try to game the system. And there are some unexpected contingencies that arise during the due diligence portion of projects. So there has to be some factor and allowances for those, but it's also a call for better communication from CTPS and more hands-on guidance and advice from them, because everybody wants to see projects come down the line which are successful. And we don't want to be encouraging projects that aren't going to be successful. It's, wastes everybody's time and effort. So perhaps, this is a call for more resources for CTPS and a more aggressive outreach program. But at the end of the line, there does have to be cost containment. And it's been a huge burden on everybody, to see tip and scheduling be in such constant flux. It's a squandering of resources right there.
All right, John, thank you very much. Any other comments? We have time. But we don't have to use that time either because we end this meeting a little earlier. That'll be okay. And so like I said, there'll be many more opportunities for people to chime in, and it'll be interesting to see how that board meeting goes, because so far it's been the ad hoc committee, and I'm sure folks on the board will have things to say, and there may be changes. It may not go out to the public right away, but something's going to go out sooner rather than later. dare I say. So we'll move on to actually, Jen, you put your hand up and took it down. You wanna-
Sorry.
Sure.
Yeah, thank you.
Sure.
Yeah, I just want to say I'm glad that this is a topic that they're digging into, and that I think it's something a lot of municipalities struggle with it, and at least having the municipalities come forth and describe what is happening will hopefully at least contribute to a greater understanding of what are some of the issues, even if some of the time it might be MassDOT requiring something, and then people can ask MassDOT, oh, why are you requiring this? And if you're requiring this, why don't you chip in a little bit more, that kind of thing. But
Right.
I think it will contribute to hopefully some learnings and best practices in the region.
And also, please take a read of the document that Matt Genova created, because in the third section, there is some cost benefit analysis that is included. And so that really is, I think, the MPO's first attempt to kind of formally incorporate cost benefit analysis into its project selection. We do that to a certain extent by scoring. But now there's a way of saying, well, we're going to probably lean towards projects that have a low cost and high scores, all things being equal. So Matt, I saw something go into the chat. I can't read chat and run these meetings. So if you see something in chat that is worthy of a comment, please just chime in. Okay.
Sure. It was just Scott announcing that he is going to pick up his daughter from her first day of preschool.
Yeah.
So your determination as to whether that's worthy of contribution, I personally think it is.
Well, it is, because I've met her and she's adorable. She's she's very very talkative, at least with me. J.R. Frey.
Hi, yes, thank you. And I'm with the town of Hingham. And I just wanted to confirm my understanding that at this point, all of this is prospective as opposed to retrospective.
Yes. Oh, so yeah. I mean, we're yeah, for the most part. I mean, so something could be on the tip, but let's say if it's not being built out, I'm hemming and hawing here because I'm trying to say this in a way that is more accurate. It came up a little bit in the last meeting. Just because something's on the tip doesn't mean it wouldn't be affected by the changing policy. So in that respect, it's potentially retrospective, but it's not like we are going to say everything now off the tip and you can only get back on if you have.
If you meet the requirements.
Right.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, more or less. I think if you were to look at Hingham's Route 3A project right now, it would be under more significant scrutiny because of where it was admitted to the tip versus where it is now.
Right.
And the question would be, and I don't have the project history because I've only been with Hingham for a little over a year now.
Right.
To say exactly where all those pieces of the cost increase came from. I know a chunk of it was a scope increase that was requested by the town in terms of the linear portion of the project. I also know that there have been a number of requirements that MassDOT has imposed, and some of those, because of the duration of this project, I mean, we're talking, I believe 6 or 7 years now that it's been generated. Some of those even some of MassDOT's requirements have changed.
Right.
So we're working through it. We definitely are, working closely both with MassDOT and our designer to make sure that we've got a successful project.
Right.
And that we, minimize any additional scope creep and mitigate cost increases. But we're also very sensitive to being impacted by a policy change midway through our project.
Right. No, I hear you. I hear you, and I understand where you're coming from. And look, and that's what the advisory council is here for. It's like to hear that point of view. And to at least make sure that point of view gets heard by the board. And so I hear you. And I think you give a good example. I have my thoughts of how I would handle that. For me, it's like, well, you kind of assess where things are with the MPO's budget now. And then if you see big increases going forward, then you deal with them. But we're not going to say, well, your project wasn't. Never mind. I was about to give an example. It's really confusing. So let me just say less, because I think I've made my point. And I hear your point, and we'll make sure that gets to the board. Laura?
Okay.
I just wanted to clarify because I wasn't sure I heard what you said correctly. Did you say that projects that are on the tip would be reassessed or would not be reassessed?
They're not going to be reassessed from the starting point. And so I just said, just because a project
From now on. Okay.
right, I said just because a project is on the tip doesn't mean that it wouldn't get additional scrutiny. So it's not like everything that's on the tip now is held completely harmless regardless of what happens to the project. But the additional scrutiny is really up to the board. At least that's my understanding of things now. But
Right.
once again, this isn't formalized. By any stretch. This hasn't even gone to the board to be approved of by the board. So this is very preliminary discussion that we're having because I'm part of the ad hoc committee and I'm kind of reporting back to you from the ad hoc committee.
Okay. So there isn't even a document to look at yet.
You
A policy.
you have what the ad hoc committee has looked at, and I feel comfortable presenting that to you because that is part of the record and it was open to the public. So it's not like I'm telling you something that I shouldn't tell you. So you can take a look at it. So I think Matt dropped it into the chat. If not, you can go to the calendar for the MPO for September 2nd and get the link from it there to it from there.
Okay. The
Yeah.
MPO September 2nd is where it is.
So it'll be on the ad hoc. So usually when you go to that calendar page, when you click on the link for any meeting, you get the links for all of the meetings, and it's the bottom one, the ad hoc committee.
Okay. Is that what Jen just dropped into the chat?
I don't know.
Yes,
Yep,
that
it
is-
is. It is. Okay. Thank you.
Right, sure. You're welcome. David?
Yeah, thanks. I think it's a great initial effort, and I can't claim to have read it thoroughly enough to say much more than that. But I just would like to maybe touch on something that JR mentioned. There's turnover all the time at the town level, and so this process of urging regular check-ins, more regular check-ins than there have been, can actually serve the towns too. Because what I've seen in Needham is the people who started something 5 years ago aren't necessarily still around. So if this process could not just ask people to come and make a presentation to the MPO, but actually have a documentary chain, some sort of evidence of what was presented that can be looked up by others later, that could be a real service to the towns and cities.
Well, that's interesting. That's an interesting take because I don't know if these touch points were meant to be public touch points. Certainly if there's like a project that has a significant increase in costs, meaning we ask them to come and explain it to us, that would be at a public meeting. But I think these touch points really going to be between the staff and the proponents. But what you say, it has merit, and so it's now a matter of whether we could make that information publicly available. So good points, David. Thank you.
Or at least shared in some way back to the municipality. It doesn't have to be publicly posted, but require a documented process that we agree this is what you presented to us. So.
Right. Yeah,
Thanks.
no, good, good. No, thanks. Great comment. Appreciate it. And so I'm not seeing any more hands up. So all right, we'll move on. And before you know it, another year, it's almost up. And so we're gonna do elections in November, which means that we need to get nominations in place made by October, which means that the election committee, subcommittee, is that what it's called, Matt? Needs to meet and do its thing. I mean, so now we need to define that committee, and then they can get together and do what they need to do.
So I will say that unfortunately Scott has left to pick up his daughter.
Yeah.
But the election committee is a fairly light lift if the current chair and vice chair plan to run again and there is no opposition. So now is the time to, if you would like to nominate yourself, feel free. I will ask Len, do you intend to run again?
It really depends on whether someone else wants to do it. Yeah. So,
Okay.
yeah. I mean, life might get a little complicated for me next year, you know. And so it might. I think if I run again, the vice chair needs to be in a position where they can step in. I would need to have a talk with MAPCs and MPOs legal counsel to see what I can do, given my role, on the select board. And but it's not like I'm tired of this by any stretch, but at the same time, I can play. I'm not going anywhere either. Whether I'm chair or not, I'm definitely not going anywhere. And so, as I tell people, you don't have to be in leadership to have a role, an important role or a big role, and you don't even have to be a member to have impact. And so, so that's a long way of saying I don't know. And if someone else is interested, don't be scared off. You can make your wishes known to Matt or whomever you want. But we need to put together a committee, right?
Yes, so the committee needs to be at least 3 members large. The bylaws state that it should ideally be chaired by a former chair of the advisory council. However, it is not a requirement. So really anybody who is feeling up to it can chair. It sounds like there may be some discussion over the coming month about potential future of the leadership of the advisory council. So there probably be several meetings. It can be through Zoom or a phone call, whatever is easier for people of the committee. But I want to make things as painless as possible. So would anyone care to volunteer? All right, I see Mr. John Seward.
I will volunteer, but refuse to chair.
Okay, listen, we're one step there. We're one step closer. I appreciate that. Thank you, John.
I think I did it last year, but I'm gonna decline. Just
Okay. That's
learning to
tot-
say no.
I appreciate it, Franny. Thank you. Fred?
I'll volunteer for the committee.
Great. Great. Thank you, Fred. Here. We could get one more person, that would be great. I should note that if we don't get the third volunteer, the bylaws do state that the advisory council folds automatically. It's like this very strange clause. I wouldn't have included it myself, but joking, of course.
What are the minimum qualifications to serve?
So you just need to be a voting member.
Okay, so I am not a voting member. That would be my town administrator, I believe. Or someone from the selectmen.
If you are, hold on one second. Sorry, I'm just having my computer going absolutely nuts. It's just the representative to the advisory council. So that could be basically anyone. However, that being said, Hingham is not currently, sorry, Hingham is not currently a voting member of the advisory council. That being said, we would love to have you. But I believe that per the bylaws, you would need to attend, I want to say one more meeting and then have a letter from your town administrator or the select board to nominate you as a representative.
Well, I see Jen asked kind of similar questions. So and then John suggested asking Andy. And so Jen, are you up for it?
Fairly certain I can't because Boston is an official MPO. Like we can't be on the advisory council because
that-
we're on
Oh,
the MPO.
right. Well, we can ask Andy.
All right, we can ask Andy.
Yeah.
And
I put a note. It seems reasonable to see if Hingham in the next month became a member. Then
You don't only have to have 3 either. You can have 4,
oh
so,
yes, I didn't mean to
yeah.
imply that. I apologize.
Right.
All right, well, I will reach out to Andy Reeker and failing that. Oh, yes, Owen.
Oh, well, I'll volunteer to serve. I do not choose to chair.
Okay, well, this will be, we now have our 3 folks. Thank you so much to John, Fred, and Owen. And then we will have a lovely argument about who will be chairing during our first formal meeting. So I'll be emailing you guys in the next few days.
All right.
Thank you so much, guys.
Cool. Thank you. So that's done. And let's see, we're a little bit behind. And okay, so we can keep topics for future council meetings on the short side. And if anyone has any ideas, and let me know, and then we get participants back up. John McQueen?
Yeah, I have 3 suggestions for topics and or people to do those topics.
Sure.
One would be to get the MBTA advisory board, specifically Brian Kane, to come in and talk about what they as an organization have been suggesting successfully or unsuccessfully to the MBTA and to the whole board, but also focusing on what aspects they're feeling would be making it easier and more comfortable or more magnetic to get more ridership on the basic MBTA, not necessarily commuter rail, but buses and subway. And then another one would be getting Glenn Burke from Better City to come in and really talk about the whole, let's say, scope of the I-90 process and also West Station and Grand Junction and just what some of the aspects and benefits and obstacles are right now. And then another would be down the road is getting an update from I guess it's MassDOT engineering in terms of what has been done or is planned on what had been the accelerated bridge repair program, which hadn't, seemed to languish, I guess, under the new not so new administration, but it had been initiated by Deval Patrick. Anyway.
Oh, good ideas, John. Thank you very much. And Franny?
I would like us to get an update on, now that the past president's gone and we don't have the same people in charge in Massachusetts, how the North-South Rail Link project is going or could go, etc.
So
I would like to really have a presentation. I'm not sure from whom. I would love to include Governor Dukakis, but I also would love to include the people from MassDOT who did the last study. But I also want to include some of the changes in federal funding. I'm just very confused about where it is. So North-South Rail Link as one, and I also would love to get an update, as I get in other organizations, but I think this group needs it, as to how the experiments with microtransit, which is sort of like Uber and Lyft for public vehicles, is going in various places. I don't know if in the funding we look at that small pot, that too small pot for community transit is the only place that that's relevant or not, but I think it's important that we are up to date on how the forays into microtransit are going. So North-South Rail Link and microtransit.
all right, thank you. John?
Thanks, Franny. That brings to mind that there's a possibly historic opportunity to make use of ERA, ARPA, whatever we're calling it, funding coming out of COVID response, to think big picture about transportation and transit. And there are a lot of projects that the MBTA has initiated that have fallen by the wayside. There are some other ideas where there clearly was never money to contemplate it seriously. And we're at a watershed moment. And we should be thinking big picture and integratively about how to do the best for the region out of our transportation investments.
Okay, so any recommendations for whom we would, or is this just a discussion topic for us as a
Well, I
body?
think it's a larger discussion topic. It could be winnowed down however you please, Mr. Chair.
All right.
But I recall Fred Salvucci saying more than 10 years ago that, if we don't have plans rolled up on the shelf, we're never going to get the funding for those things, and they'll never turn into reality.
All right. No, I hear you. It's just that if you had someone in mind, you could start reaching out to them. But I hear you.
I don't have a particular hobby horse here.
Gotcha. Is that your hand back up, Franny?
Yeah, I was reminded by what John said, that I went to a meeting the other day of the new Regional Transportation Advisory Advancement Coalition, which is pushing the Regional Transportation Advisory Advancement Bill in the state. And so I definitely want to get updates from them. And one of the people there had a whole list of added COVID spending, some of which could be used for transit. And I think that looking at that list, sharing that list amongst us, and maybe getting either the person from Massachusetts Public Health Association, Alexis Walls, or that person who I can't remember from the meeting, who had reviewed all of the funding opportunities, would be good to bring to us.
That sounds great. So I want to touch base with you on that. And so I was unaware of that coalition. Sounds like a good thing. And would like to hear more about that from some of the people that you mentioned. So let's definitely get in touch and see if we can schedule someone sooner rather than later. So David?
Yeah, thanks. So many years ago now, we used to have periodic appearances from folks associated with the Joint Committee of Transportation on Beacon Hill. And I always found that kind of helpful to remind myself of what was, it wasn't always directly applicable, but it helped us remember what isn't applicable to the domain of the MPO, or there are large funding sources sort of at play that is its own universe, and we need to be aware of what's going on there and keep things in their appropriate columns. So if there was any way to reach out to and try to reestablish connections with that body, I mean, our connection back when was with Mayor McGee, Tom McGee of Lynn, but I don't know if we have anything more up to date. I'd love to hear something about what's coming down the pike from the legislature's perspective.
Right. Well, that's good, and that kind of ties in, with the Regional Transportation Advisory Advancement Coalition, if I got that name right. I mean, so, yeah. So okay, great, excellent ideas, folks. Really good ideas. So, so look, we're gonna run a little long compared to the agenda. I mean, but the agenda was prepared. I mean, with understanding that we do have 75 minutes. But if people want to bail out because you weren't expecting it to go past 4 o'clock, that's okay. I will quickly give a little update on the past MPO meetings. This last one, we discussed community connections. That's that small pot that you were talking about, Franny. And I'm going to see if I can get the presentation from Matt because there's a lot there. And the MPO is wanting to change the way that it deals with that program. And I think we are going to want to have something to say about that, if not a lot to say about that. So trying to get a more, a better, something that we can read from Matt. If nothing else, just his presentation, because I don't want to do a disservice to it or mislead folks. By not portraying it accurately. But we're going to have some time, I think, to input on this. And if it turns out that I'm wrong about that, then I may suggest that we have a meeting sooner rather than later, just to make our voices heard. So that's that meeting. In the August 5th meeting, there was a discussion about municipal elections, and there was an interesting point about how I guess there were like maybe 2 communities that had tried to get on the board but hadn't been able to get on, I guess because another community or communities were winning the elections. And hey, that's a democratic process, but at the same time, it seems like some other entities do want to be on, so maybe we could create some means for expansion so that we could have more folks, especially if it brings me some additional viewpoints in. And I had mentioned that it would be good if we could figure out ways to get more women on the board, and that in the process of trying to do that, we might find other ways to get more diversity on the board. And because I was trying to keep my comments short, I didn't say that this also applies to the advisory council. And so I want to see us try to work on that too, because whereas I often say there's not a whole lot of racial diversity go around, in Massachusetts, that's not the case with gender, and I'd like to see us work on that. And in the August 19th meeting, there was a draft public outreach process that was presented by Kate White, who has now left, and she's now working in Somerville, so she's not gone completely. We still have access to her if we ask nicely, and that's been released for a 45-day comment period. So please read that, and if you feel that we should make comments on it, we will. I'm kind of thinking that we should, since one of the things that the advisory committee is supposed to do is handle public outreach for the advisory council, and also mention, because there wasn't a public outreach process defined for the LRTP, given our role, which was nicely pointed out or included in the appendix of that document, that staff should come to us regarding that outreach process before it goes to the board, because usually things go to the board, have to get approved by the board before they come to us. But I suggested strongly that that be reversed in the case of the outreach process for the LRTP. Not that I have any issues with the way that staff have been going about it. They've been going about it in a good way, but I think it just would kind of reinforce the point that that is under the jurisdiction, for lack of a better word, of the advisory council. And the last thing I'll point out is Ken Dumas's major infrastructure milestones. He presented that at the July 15th meeting, and I was impressed by it. And so I don't know if it's on the MPO's website yet. At the time of the meeting, it wasn't, but I got the impression that it was going to be soon. So now, with it being 2 months later, I'm pretty sure it's there. But take a look. There are lots of links to it. And it really is an impressive piece of work. As I told Ken, I wasn't excited by it when we approved it in the UPWP for I guess it's fiscal year 20, or maybe it's 21. But having seen it, it's like it's good. It's a good piece of work. I mean, I just hope that there are some means to keep it updated. So that's that for me on updates. And with that, we'll open it up to old business, new business.
Len, I did just want to say very quickly that the Major Milestones Interactive app is in fact online, and I've dropped the link to it in the chat, along with the draft public outreach plan.
Thank you, Matt.
Yeah.
Appreciate it. Oh, well.
Len, you've been doing a great job. I just want to say that.
Well, thanks. I really have enjoyed this immensely. Even more than I thought I would. I had this notion of kind of if folks would have me like going through a full LRTP cycle, but getting us through the needs assessment, I think, really sets us up to make a bigger impact on the next LRTP. And so I really appreciate you humoring me in doing that. And I really thank you, John McQueen, for it's very clear that you were reading and giving really good comments. And getting to participate in the policy making on in the most recent ad hoc committee for dealing with hopefully dealing with increased unexpected price increases, cost increases. It's been a real pleasure. So like I said, I'm not going anywhere. Regardless of my role, I think it's a great group. I think the MPO is a really good board full of good people who really are doing their best to make transportation better in our region. And my respect for them has only grown, and my respect for all of you has grown too. So thank you, Franny. John?
I'd like to move to adjourn.
Yes. We'll take a second on that.
I'll second that.
All right. So we can do this without going through a roll. And so take care, folks. See you next month.